Hello everyone, a very good morning. Welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to our daily Hindu analysis. Now before we begin, we have a small announcement. Yesterday, the much awaited Target Prelims 2023 crash course has begun live on our YouTube channel. Yesterday we had the first session on Indian economy, and today at 7:30 p.m. Sham sir will be conducting the second session for Indian economy. So do attend these sessions live so that you can thoroughly prepare for the upcoming prelims. Also take a look at the detailed schedule which has been shared over here, and the same details are provided in the description box below as well. So let's start with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper by first looking at the topics we're going to cover today. I have chosen three important editorials and columns from page number 8 and 10. We shall carry out a thorough analysis of these topics, and then we shall take a look at a few prelims related articles. So just stay with me for the next 1 hour or maybe 1 hour 10 minutes. I promise to cover all these topics as comprehensively as possible to help you prepare both for your prelims and the mains examination. In return, all you have to do is like the video, share your comments, and subscribe to our channel. So let's get started with the first topic from page number 8. We have a column written by PDT Achari, who is a former Secretary General of the Lok Sabha. So based on his experience in dealing with the parliament, in dealing with bills and legislative action, he is talking about the role of governor when it comes to providing his assent to the bills that have been passed by the state assemblies. Of late, a lot of controversy has come up in this regard. In states such as Tamil Nadu, Telangana, and in several other states, there is a standoff going on between the office of the governor and the concerned state governments and state legislative assemblies. The problem is, several bills that have been passed by the elected representatives through the state legislature have been withheld by the governors almost indefinitely. If you look at Tamil Nadu, for example, Governor R.N. Ravi, whom you can see in the image here, has often taken a very controversial position on several bills, and repeatedly he has withheld assent and he has tried to block several bills that have been passed by the Tamil Nadu state legislature. So here it becomes important to examine the constitutional provisions regarding the powers of the governor with regard to granting his assent to bills. We should examine the role of the state legislature. What is the lawmaking power of the state, of the elected representatives? Does the governor truly have the authority to block bills which have been passed by elected representatives? What does the constitution say about this? So that is what we need to examine. See, this issue has become all the more important because recently the Tamil Nadu State Assembly, it adopted a resolution. It passed a resolution against the governor, and it has asked the President of India to intervene and provide for a fixed timeline within which the governor has to provide assent to the bills that have been already passed by the State Assembly. Now this is quite unprecedented. See, generally when a state government and the state legislature, if they are not functioning in accordance with the constitution, it's the union government which has the powers under Article 355 to intervene and ensure that states function within the constitutional mandate. They function according to the provisions of the constitution. But it's quite rare for a state to be requesting the union to ensure that the functioning of the state machinery is in accordance with the constitution. So here the State Assembly of Tamil Nadu has passed a resolution which is urging the President of India, who is the head of the union executive, to fix a time limit for governors to provide their assent to bills which have been passed by the assembly. So this is an unprecedented development. In Telangana as well, the state government has approached the Supreme Court of India. Even the Telangana government has similar issues with the governor. Several bills have been pending, they have been reserved for consideration of the president. So Telangana, which has been frustrated with the actions of the governor, has approached the Supreme Court asking for directions asking for a time limit to be fixed within which the governor has to provide assent to bills that have been passed by the legislature. But on the other hand, Governor R.N. Ravi of Tamil Nadu has said that it's the duty of the governor to ensure that if a law is transgressing the constitutional limits, then it becomes the duty of the governor to put an end to such laws. This is the stand being taken by the governor. This is the other side of the argument. The governor is saying that some of the laws passed by the Tamil Nadu state legislature is ultra vires the Indian constitution. According to the governor, it transgresses the constitutional limits and boundaries. So on these lines, the governor has taken a stand and is seen to be withholding his assent almost indefinitely. So in this context, let's examine the constitutional provisions first. Let's look at Article 200, which deals with the powers of the governor to grant assent to bills. Let's look at the provisions here. Let's also talk about Article 355, and finally, let's look at the writer's argument. See, under Article 200, the powers of the governor to grant assent to bills has been provided. If a bill has been passed by both houses of the legislature, if there are two houses, that is, you have a legislative assembly and a legislative council, or in those states where you just have a legislative assembly, if these bills have been passed by the state legislature, they shall be presented to the governor. And the governor has a few options in front of him. As the head of the state executive, as a representative of the union government at the state level, the governor is essentially a nominal authority. Our constitution makers, they have envisioned the office of the governor as a nominal authority, as a figurehead, as someone who heads the state executive. But this is largely a nominal position with very few discretionary powers provided to the governor. The governor was supposed to be a link between the union and the state to support the smooth functioning of Indian federalism. This is how our constitution makers had envisioned the office of the governor. But over a period of time, the office of the governor has often been controversial. It's often been alleged that the ruling party at the center misuses the governor's office to destabilize elected state governments. It's been said that the governor has become an agent of the center. So such controversy exists with regard to the office of the governor and the powers of the governor. When it comes to granting assent to bills passed by state legislature, governor has been provided with few options under Article 200. The governor can either provide his assent to the bill so that the bill becomes a law and comes into force, or the governor can withhold assent, but not indefinitely. The governor has the power to withhold assent for a short period, but it cannot be an indefinite hold, which leads to the lapsing of the bill eventually. Or the third option for the governor is he or she can reserve the bill for the consideration of the President of India if the bill seems to be violating the constitutional provisions and the powers of the High Court. If a bill passed by the state legislature is not in line with the laws of the center, if it's not within the constitutional limits, if it is seen to be going against the powers of the High Court, in such instances, the governor can reserve the bill as well for the consideration of the President of India. And these are the three options available to the governor. Now, when it comes to the time limit, within which period of time should the governor decide and exercise these options? The Constitution is very silent on this. Many legal constitutional experts point out that this is the critical flaw in Article 200. Here the key word is as soon as possible. This word I have highlighted in red. Look at this provision, what the line reads: provided that the governor may, as soon as possible after the presentation to him of the bill for assent, return the bill if it is not a money bill. Right? If the governor is not if he is not convinced with the provisions in the bill, if he has some concerns about the bill, he can return the bill as well. He can ask the state legislature to consider the bill again, provided if it's not a money bill. Now, in such case of reconsideration, if the governor has pushed the bill back to the legislature, then the legislature can either consider the concerns of the governor, maybe come up with amendments, or it can pass the same bill again even without amendments. So with or without amendments, if the bill is passed again by the House and if it is sent back to the governor, then governor has no other discretion. The governor cannot withhold assent. Article 200 is very, very clear in this regard. If the governor has sent the bill for reconsideration of the House, and if the House passes the bill again with or without amendment, the governor is bound to grant his assent. When it comes to reserving the bill, this is where the governor has a slight discretion. If the governor feels that the bill is, let's say, against or it's counter to some of the laws of the center, or if it's breaching the constitutional limits, or if it's against the powers of the High Court, governor can reserve such bills for the consideration of the President of India. All right? So here the governor has a certain degree of discretion. But when it comes to withholding of assent, if the governor decides to withhold the assent, it is only for a short period. It cannot be indefinite. Here the flaw in the article is that it is not specifying the time limit. It has not given the time limit. There is no time limit within which the governor has to act, within which the governor has to decide and make these choices. Look at the key word here. The Constitution says as soon as possible. So a clear time frame has not been prescribed, and this often is misused by governors, especially for political reasons. When you have two different parties at the center and the state, you often see that governors are holding back their assent, that too sometimes indefinitely, leading to a constitutional crisis of sorts at the state level. So this is where the writer examines the possibility of an intervention through Article 355. Now, what does Article 355 say? Article 355 says, if governance in a state is not being carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution, then the union government can intervene. In fact, this is one of the grounds for imposition of president's rule by the center. If administration in a state is not being carried out in accordance with the Constitution, if there is a breach of the constitutional order, the center can intervene. This is what enables the union government to even invoke Article 356 and bring in president's rule. Now, if you look at the purpose of Article 355, our constitution makers were very clear. Dr. Ambedkar, the chairman of the drafting committee, he said that Article 355 is meant to provide a justification, a constitutional justification for the invasion of the provincial field. That is, for the center to step in to the domain of the state. It is a constitutional justification through which the center can interfere in the state domain, in the domain of the state, in the provincial field, for the purpose of ensuring that state's governance and administration is carried on in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution. But the writer is arguing this could work the other way as well. Now, what if the governor is not acting in line with the Constitution? Even that would be a breach of Article 355. It would mean that state's administration is not being carried out in accordance with the Constitution. So then what's wrong if the state assembly passes a resolution urging the president to intervene, to ensure that state's administration can be carried out in accordance with the Constitution? This is the other way of looking at it. So the resolution adopted by the Tamil Nadu State Assembly is quite unprecedented, where the state is urging the president to intervene in the state's domain in order to ensure that the governor does not meddle with the constitutional separation of powers. Now, the elected representatives who are part of the legislature, the elected government in a democratic state, has complete constitutional mandate to bring out the laws it wants, because it has the mandate of the people. Governor is a nominal authority, someone who's nominated, appointed by the central government. So how can such an office put a hold on critical bills that have been passed by the legislature, by a elected government, by a democratically elected government? This is the key question coming up here, and hence the writer says this is something that the Supreme Court, the President, and the Government of India should consider. Either there should be a judicial intervention where the Supreme Court steps in and fixes a time limit for the governor when it comes to granting assent. Because the Constitution is very clear though, this is not a discretionary power of the governor. Governor's discretion is limited to reserving the bill for the President. And it's also very, very important to note, when it comes to the veto powers enjoyed by the governor has not been given pocket veto. You would have studied in Indian polity that President and the governor have been given with veto powers when it comes to granting their assent to bills. We have absolute veto, suspensive veto, and pocket veto. Absolute veto is when the governor or the president can withhold their assent for a short period of time. They can think, they can go through the provisions, and then they can exercise suspensive veto where they are sending the bill back for reconsideration by the House. This is called suspensive veto. But however, the governor has not been vested with pocket veto. Pocket veto means withholding assent indefinitely. Withholding assent for an indefinite time period. This is pocket veto, and this cannot be exercised by the governor. Governor has not been provided with pocket veto, as we just saw under Article 200. The governor either has to grant assent or send it back for reconsideration, which is suspensive veto, or reserve it for the president. And if the president later recommends few changes and the state assembly considers that, the governor is again bound to either provide the assent or again reserve it for the consideration of the president. But he cannot withhold assent indefinitely. There cannot be indecisiveness here, which will cripple the functioning of the state legislature. So this, according to the writer, represents a breakdown of constitutional machinery, because the governor is breaching his constitutional mandate. It's creating a situation where the state can no longer function in accordance with the Constitution. Thus the writer says this is a right ground for invoking Article 355, where an intervention would be needed, maybe by the president, that is through the central government, to clear this confusion, to fix a time limit. This would require a constitutional amendment. If that is unlikely, the writer says we at least need a judicial intervention through the Supreme Court. Right? Through a Supreme Court pronouncement or through a constitutional amendment, a time limit has to be fixed for the governor, within which they have to decide on granting assent to bills. According to the writer, this would fix the issue. He also gives us a comparison with the model followed in UK. Because Indian Constitution is largely a derivative of UK's parliamentary Westminster model. So if you look at the model in UK, when it comes to the bills passed by the British Parliament, the British sovereign, the monarch, has very, very limited powers. Is that clear? According to D.D. Basu, constitutional expert D.D. Basu, he says that the sovereign in UK, that is the British monarch, cannot hold back laws which have been backed by the legislature, which have been passed by the British Parliament. The established norm in UK as well is that the sovereign, even though technically speaking can refuse assent, it has not been exercised as a matter of convention since the reign of Queen Anne. It's been decades, it's been almost a couple of centuries since the sovereign exercised this right. It essentially highlights the supremacy of the elected representatives. If British Parliament brings out a bill, the sovereign monarch of UK will not withhold assent. Even though legally speaking it is possible to withhold assent, the monarch does not do that, cannot do that, because it is seen as unconstitutional. It's not the jurisdiction of the monarch to decide whether the law is right or wrong for the country. This is for the elected representatives to decide, for the legislature to decide. So refusal of the royal assent is seen as unconstitutional in UK's parliamentary democracy as well. So the same logic would apply here. The governor cannot be the deciding authority. The governor cannot decide what is right, what is wrong. The governor is similarly a nominal authority bound by the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. Now let's say if the Council of Ministers advise the governor to withhold assent, then that is a different case. Ideally it wouldn't happen because the government itself would have brought the bill and got it passed through the houses. So why would the government, why would the Council of Ministers themselves advise the governor to withhold assent? Usually it will not happen. Let's say the government wants to hold the bill back for certain reasons. Maybe the government has second thoughts. If the advice comes from Council of Ministers to the governor to hold the bill, then it is constitutionally valid. But however, the governor cannot decide this on his own. It can't be a discretionary power. So that is the argument the writer is making. There have been previous judgments in this regard, but a time limit has not been fixed. That is why the writer says we either need a judicial intervention or a constitutional amendment. So I hope you understood this topic. Now let's move on to the next article, the second article. So before that, let's see if you have any doubts, any questions. Any doubts, any specific doubts on this topic? Okay, let's move on. Let's look at the next article from page number 10. This topic is from international relations. It's a very important, very interesting topic. It deals with the ongoing privatization of warfare. It deals with the ongoing privatization of warfare by a few global powers. Global powers such as Russia, the United States, and few other countries. They have started outsourcing warfare. They have started encouraging private militias, private paramilitary forces, and they have started legitimizing the usage of private mercenaries in conflict. Now this is a very, very serious concern. So let's look at this topic in more detail. Some of you might have heard about this organization called the Wagner Group of Russia. Or you might have heard about another private company, a security company called Blackwater. It was previously known as Blackwater or XE. Now it's part of a different group called Constellis. This is another private security company based out of the United States. There is a similar private company in Russia called Wagner Group. These organizations have become extremely controversial because of the role they are playing in conflicts. If you look at the Blackwater or XC, or now known as Constellis Group of the US, it was established by former US Special Forces officers. Former US commandos, they founded this private organization. It is known to work very closely with the American intelligence agency, the CIA, and also with the American armed forces. This outfit I'm mentioning, it's essentially a private company, a private security firm. Similarly, in Russia also, we have a private security organization called the Wagner Group, which was founded by this individual, whom you can see in the image over here. His name is Yevgeny Prigozhin. He's a very controversial, very popular Russian figure. He's also referred to as the chef or the cook. At one point, he was a personal chef of Russian President Putin. His company caters to the Kremlin and the top leaders, including the Russian president. So from catering business, Yevgeny Prigozhin has ventured into other domains as well, reportedly with the backing of the Kremlin and Russian President Putin. And he has started a private mercenary group, a private paramilitary organization called the Wagner Group. Now this particular outfit has attracted a lot of controversy as it has been involved in several combat military operations in Africa, in West Asia, and as well as in Ukraine. Similarly, several US private paramilitary forces have been operating in several conflict zones, and apparently they all have close links with their respective governments, their respective intelligence agencies and armed forces. It's widely believed that the Wagner Group of Russia works closely with Russia's FSB, GRU, and the Russian armed forces. FSB is the Foreign Intelligence Agency of Russia. GRU is a Russian military intelligence agency. Apparently, former commandos, special forces officers, they go and join such private paramilitary groups, and they maintain a link with their government, with their intelligence agencies and armed forces. So on behalf of their respective countries and governments and intelligence agencies, they conduct these operations in other countries. They provide security services to other governments, foreign governments. And in the name of security, they are engaging in warfare, and they have allegedly committed large-scale human rights violations, supported dictatorships, committed war crimes. So these are very, very serious concerns that have come up. Because ideally, warfare should be the domain of the government, the state, where there is a legal constitutional framework to hold the security forces accountable for any atrocities that they might commit. But the moment you start outsourcing warfare, the moment you start privatizing warfare, it gives rise to very, very serious legal, constitutional, and ethical moral concerns. So the topic is not just relevant for international relations, it's also relevant for polity and even for ethics. Similarly, there are many other mercenary groups. There are European security organizations. There are few private mercenaries from South Africa. These private armies are being hired by other governments, by other intelligence agencies. And they're using them in conflicts, in countries where civil wars are going on, in countries where there is terrorism, especially authoritarian leaders and dictators. They are hiring these private militias and private mercenaries to provide security, and in the name of security, they are encouraging authoritarian dictatorships. They are also carrying out human rights violations, large-scale human rights violations without any accountability. So if you look at the Wagner Group of Russia, it has been involved in several controversial operations across Africa, Ukraine, and Syria. In Syria, for example, the Wagner Group allegedly was fighting against the Islamic State and other radical groups which were posing a threat to the Syrian government headed by President Bashar al-Assad. Assad is a very close ally of Putin and Russia. So according to reports, Russia has given support to Assad's government, and it has used Wagner Group for this purpose in the name of fighting terrorism. Through Wagner Group, Russia has apparently targeted the rebels who had pushed Syria into a civil war by challenging the rule of Bashar al-Assad. Apparently, these Syrian rebels were sponsored by Western countries, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and other countries as part of their covert war against Syria. It's said that Western countries led by US, Israel, Saudi Arabia, they wanted to topple the government of Bashar al-Assad. So they sponsored a civil war by backing the rebels in a so-called pro-democracy movement. Apparently, they even backed several radical groups that gave rise to terrorism in the Syria region and enabled Al-Qaeda and even Islamic State to thrive in the Iraq-Syria belt. So to support Assad and to counter these radical groups, Russia apparently has taken the help of Wagner Group along with Russian armed forces and Russian intelligence to support the Syrian government in this fight against terrorism and in defeating the rebels. But by doing this, Russia has enabled the dictatorship of Assad, and apparently they have committed large-scale human rights violations. In the ongoing Ukraine conflict, it's not just Russian armed forces which have invaded Ukraine, even Russian private mercenaries are fighting this war. Wagner Group is deeply involved in the Ukraine conflict, and private mercenaries are fighting this conflict on behalf of Russia. But the bigger concern is in Africa. As you know, there are many countries in Africa which have already been destabilized from a long time. Especially, this comes up in the context of Sudan. I'm sure you know what has happened in Sudan. A fresh civil war has broken out, infighting has begun, and hundreds of Indians have been trapped as well. Right? We have been discussing this from several days. So India is working out an evacuation plan called Operation Kaveri to bring back the Indian community which has been trapped in Sudan, including members of the Hakki Pikki tribe from Karnataka, who gained a lot of prominence following the crisis in Sudan. So in Sudan, it so happens that Russia's Wagner group is deeply involved in this conflict. The United States is deeply involved in this conflict. So these foreign powers are enabling dictatorships. They are using private mercenaries for their own selfish interests. And this is further destabilizing the situation, strengthening dictators and autocratic leaders and leading to large-scale human rights violations. These private mercenaries, they are not just involved in these conflicts, they are also serving a geopolitical purpose. They are also serving an economic interest. For example, if you look at the Wagner group was hired by Sudan's armed forces. But Wagner group has gotten closer to this paramilitary outfit called RSF, which is currently fighting against the Sudanese armed forces. The current conflict in Sudan is between the Sudanese armed forces and the RSF. And Wagner group is very close on both the sides, especially it's backing the RSF paramilitary. And apparently, the Wagner group has gained control of resources in Sudan. This could be a motivation for private mercenaries like Wagner group. Sudan, for example, is blessed with gold. And Wagner group has won licenses to mine gold as well. So there is an economic angle, an incentive to perpetuate the conflict. According to reports, Russia is about to sign an agreement with Sudan to develop a military base for the Russian Navy at the port of Sudan in Red Sea. Please look at the map. Red Sea is a strategic location. And apparently Russia wants to have a military presence here in the Red Sea because Sudan opens to the Red Sea, and at port of Sudan, there is a report that Russia might sign an agreement with Sudan to establish a military base, a naval base. So when such geopolitical and economic incentives are present, Russian intelligence agencies, Russian armed forces might deliberately use private mercenaries like Wagner Group to destabilize those countries, perpetuate the conflict so that Russian geopolitical and economic interests are protected and promoted. You can see the same happening in other African countries as well. For example, if you look at Mozambique, you look at Central African Republic, Libya, Mali, Burkina Faso, Cameroon. In all these countries, including Kenya, where there is terrorism, civil wars going on, Wagner Group of Russia is involved. It's not just Russia, Western countries are no less. As I told you, there are several American private mercenaries as well. There are South African private mercenaries. These private mercenaries or private paramilitary forces, they are looking after their own economic interests. They are getting hold of resources. You look at the Sahel region here in Africa. This part of Africa you see here is the Sahel region. The region above the Saharan belt, stretching all the way from Atlantic to the Red Sea. This whole region here is the Sahel region. This whole belt, where you have countries like Mali, Burkina Faso, Sudan, etc. In Mali and Burkina Faso, recently there has been a rise in jihadist activity and radical terrorism. So to fight the terrorism here, French government had deployed its armed forces under Operation Barkhane. France, which was a colonial power in this region, was looking to stabilize Mali and Burkina Faso, and it had launched a military operation called Operation Barkhane with support from UK and US. These Western powers were interfering in Mali, Burkina Faso, basically the Sahel region, to help the dictatorships here to defeat radical jihadist terror which had taken root in the African Sahel. But however, Wagner Group of Russia meddled in this conflict, started backing the dictators, and eventually we saw a rise in radical terror activities. Recently, France has ended Operation Barkhane. It has withdrawn from the region. It has withdrawn its military operation. So you can see a geopolitical rivalry going on as well between Russia and the Western countries as to who plays a determining role in these conflicts. Because those who win the conflict will get hold of the resources as well, along with geopolitical influence. You see the same happening in Burkina Faso and Libya, and also in Central African Republic. In Central African Republic, Wagner Group has won a license for logging to exploit the timber resource. Right? So there is a clear economic angle, and it gives Russia a geopolitical influence as well to counter the Western influence. So this is the biggest concern here. That is what the writer of this column is expressing. These private mercenaries, they are not accountable. They are operating outside the law. They have no legality under international law. International law actually deals with private mercenaries. Such practices are actually outlawed in international law. But however, countries like Russia, through private mercenaries like Wagner Group, led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, and even Western countries like US and European countries, have frequently used private mercenaries in all these conflict zones that you can see over here. The US has done the same in Yemen, in Syria, in Afghanistan, right? They've used private mercenaries to serve their geopolitical and economic interests. As I told you, these private paramilitary groups, they have close links with their respective governments, their intelligence agencies and armed forces. So that is the biggest concern here. There are clear examples to show, there is evidence to show that these private mercenaries have gotten hold of resources in African countries. So the geopolitical angle becomes very apparent. It becomes very evident what Russia is trying to achieve. And these are the serious concerns that come up because of the actions of these countries and these private paramilitary outfits. Now, if you look at what international law says about the legality of mercenaries, we have a separate UN convention for this. The UN International Convention against the recruitment, use, financing and training of mercenaries. See, private security groups are allowed, but recruiting, financing and hiring mercenaries for warfare is actually prohibited. And if they were to commit any atrocities or any violations, the respective states are responsible to hold them accountable. If a private militia is committing human rights violations, sexual abuse, molestation and war crimes, respective countries are bound to hold them accountable. But this is not happening currently in the case of these private paramilitary outfits. Russia has said that Wagner Group is legal. According to Russian law, Wagner Group is a legal private security outfit. So according to Russian President Putin, Wagner Group does not break Russian law. But Russia chooses to ignore the international convention. And even though there are serious allegations of human rights violations by Wagner Group, Russia is obviously ignoring these allegations. In fact, the mercenaries of Wagner Group have been celebrated in Russia as they are fighting the war in Ukraine. They have been called as heroes, just like you would refer to your soldiers, your armed forces. The US also has done the same. As I told you, Western countries are involved in the same practice. So this privatization of warfare, which we have seen in the last 10-15 years, is a serious concern. It not only brings up these legal concerns, it brings up ethical concerns as well. All right? So this is something you should be aware of, because you can expect an essay topic here or maybe a mains question as well. All right? So I hope you understood the topic. Now moving on to the next article from page number 8, India's former ambassador Vivek Kadju. He's talking about Indian diplomacy and how India finds it challenging to strike a balance between its national interests and principles of morality. See, this is always a challenge in foreign policy. When it comes to international relations, any country would be looking after its own respective national interests. National interests are nothing but the self-interests of a nation. The security interests of a country, strategic interests, economic interests, trade and cultural interests of a nation. These are the self-interests of a country. So diplomacy or foreign policy is meant to serve this purpose. Any country would look after its own self-interest. That is a priority for any country in international relations. There's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes your national interests might be in conflict with principles of morality, with values, ethics, etc. Now, this is where a challenge arises for several countries in their foreign policy. Whether you stand with morals, values, and principles, whether you take an idealist stand, or do you take a realist, pragmatic stand to protect your self-interests, even at the cost of eroding morals, values, and principles? This has always been a challenge. That's why in political science and international relations, we have two different schools of thought. You have an idealist school of thought, which believes that idealism, morality, values should always prevail, because this is what represents a civilized society, a civilized democracy. So under the idealist school of thought, morality, values, ethics, principles, they are given priority. So values like fundamental rights, basic human rights. So these values are always prioritized under the idealist school of thought. But there is a different strand in political science international relations which believes that in certain instances you cannot be idealistic. You can't always take the moral high ground. If you do that, you might end up compromising your own self-interests. So in such instances, it is better to protect your realistic, pragmatic interests by adopting the approach of realpolitik. Realpolitik is an approach in international relations where countries coldly pursue their national interests. They ignore the ideals of morals, ethics, etc. They keep them aside and they coldly pursue their national interests, and this approach is called realpolitik, or a realistic, pragmatic approach towards foreign policy. Every country would do the same, and India also has been doing the same from quite a long time. If you take the Russia-Ukraine war, we have chosen not to criticize Russia at any cost. Till date, not even once has India directly blamed Russia for the conflict. Right? We have urged Russia to end the war. That is different. That's not criticism. We have urged for peace. We have urged for negotiations. We have expressed concern about human rights, not specifically for Ukrainians, for Russians and Ukrainians together. So at no instance has India criticized Russia for the way in which it has breached international law and how it has violated the sovereignty of Ukraine. India has abstained from all the votes against Russia, and India has not held Russia responsible for the violations, atrocities, and human rights violations that have reportedly happened in Ukraine. Because Russia is a critical partner, a strategic partner from several decades. Since the Soviet era, Russia has been a time-trusted friend for India. So India has chosen the idealist principles to be kept aside, and we have chosen the realist path here in order to protect our core national interests. We have even bypassed the Western sanctions, and we have continued trading with Russia. Right? We have been the biggest purchaser of Russian oil and gas. We have imported weapons from Russia such as S-400, and we continue to make payments in alternate currencies. So this shows the realist approach of India, where we are keeping aside our commitments towards morals, values, etc. You see something similar happening in Myanmar. Since 1960s, Myanmar's military has committed large-scale atrocities, but India has turned a blind eye to it. And there's a reason for that. India's northeast region is very, very vulnerable to insurgency. We have hostile countries like China giving covert support to northeast insurgents via Myanmar. There are native ethnic groups in Myanmar who are linked with northeast tribes who support some of the northeast insurgents. So ensuring security in the northeast is a top priority for India, a core national interest for India. So to protect this realist pragmatic interest, India would go to any extent. That is what subsequent governments have done since 1960s. There have been many military coups. There have been large-scale human rights violations. But India has never criticized Myanmar for it. Rather, we have helped Myanmar. We have given funds, we have given weapons, we have invested in Myanmar. We even have very close security relations with Myanmar's military. When Western countries imposed sanctions on Myanmar, we ignored the sanctions. We bypassed the Western sanctions. This again shows an example where India chose a realist, pragmatic approach and kept aside idealism. Now, this approach of India has come for criticism from Ukraine. Recently, Ukraine's Deputy Minister for Foreign Affairs came to India, and the minister was very critical of India's dichotomy in its foreign policy. Because on one hand, we seem to preach to the world that we are the Vishwa Guru, that we would provide leadership to the world, and on the other hand, we appear to be ignoring these crimes against humanity. So this is what the Ukrainian minister criticized. And Western diplomats, Western governments also have a similar complaint against India from many, many years. Even in the past, India has been accused of such contradictions in its own foreign policy. But however, please note that such a dichotomy is not just seen in India's foreign policy, it's a feature of almost every country's foreign policy. In fact, the big powers who are preaching to India today, be it US or European countries, even they follow a similar contradictory foreign policy. It might appear hypocritical sometimes, but countries are always looking after their self-interests, and sometimes there's nothing wrong with it. Because sometimes you may not be able to positively influence in such conflict situations. For example, in Myanmar, there is little that India can do to protect human rights or to promote democracy. India has bigger concerns here to take care of, which is to keep China away, to curb Northeast insurgency and secure the Myanmar border. So, realism dictates that India should have good relations with Myanmar no matter who is in power, no matter what's happening inside the country. Because sometimes it is not your business. You may not be able to interfere everywhere. Now, India cannot prevent Russia from invading Ukraine, or India can't convince Russia to end the war in Ukraine. So there's nothing that India will achieve by criticizing Russia or by siding with Western countries against Russia. Rather, it's better for India to at least protect its core interests and maintain the close friendship with Russia, as Russia has always been a time-tested friend. Russia has stood for India repeatedly in the past as well. So this is a realistic, pragmatic approach that India takes, which we see with other countries as well. But of late, India gets criticized for it. Right? Western countries, Ukraine, they all complain that there is a dichotomy in Indian foreign policy. India preaches human rights, democracy to others. India says it's a Vishwa Guru. But on the same hand, at the same time, India seems to be backing such authoritarian governments which are involved in committing human right violations. Now let me give you some examples here to show how other countries are also following similar hypocritical positions. You look at UK and France back in 1956. They invaded Egypt when then Egyptian leader Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the strategic Suez Canal. They did this to protect their interests. Suez Canal was critical for shipping and global economy. The colonial powers, to protect their dominant influence, they attacked Egypt. At this point, India was non-aligned. During the Cold War period, which had started after Second World War, India had clearly opted for non-alignment. In fact, India's then Prime Minister Nehru had championed the non-aligned movement with Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser. So India not only criticized the Anglo-French invasion, we even supported Egypt because we were like-minded countries. Despite our non-aligned position, we backed Egypt because Egypt was also a non-aligned country. Plus, there was the common spirit of colonial history which bound us together. Throughout 1960s, 1970s, we took a stand against colonialism, imperialism. We supported the decolonization of many European colonies. Later, when US meddled in Vietnam and even invaded Vietnam in 1960s during the Cold War, India was critical of the US. Right? So there are instances where India has done the opposite. At the same time, especially in 1970s to 1980s, as India got closer to Soviet Union, we remained silent on similar Soviet actions in Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and later when Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan in 1979. So what you see here is a dichotomy. Hypocrisy would not be the right word here. Most countries practice the same approach. Look at US. In that case, US would be the biggest hypocrite. There have been many instances where US has supported human rights, supported democracy. Myanmar itself is a classic example. Right? US criticizes China, Russia for violating human rights. But on the other hand, US works closely with dictators. It has worked with regimes that curb and stifle human rights, like Saudi Arabia, for example. US has worked closely with Turkey, many African countries, many West Asian countries, which are known to violate democratic human rights. US has very close strategic relations with authoritarian leaders and dictators, right? So every country pursues such policies. You see that dichotomy because countries are balancing out their national interests with the need for protecting morality. And India is seen to be doing the same. But now this becomes a bigger challenge for India because see, previously India was not very aggressive about it. We would protect our national interests where needed, and where needed we would support idealist principles as well, like democracy and fundamental rights and human rights. But of late, India has become more combative. We have become more aggressive in our approach, where we are pointing out the hypocrisy of the Western countries. So this, according to the writer, will create challenges for India. The writer says India has to fine-tune its position. We will have to explain to the world why we are taking such positions which appear to be contradictory. We have to justify it as well. We can't simply dismiss the concerns, or we can't simply brush them aside, and we can't say that we are doing what other countries are doing. If India wants to emerge as a regional global power, according to the writer, we need to strike a better balance and justify this to the world as well, why there is a dichotomy in our foreign policy. Is that clear? So that is what the writer is arguing. So this completes my detailed discussion on the important editorials and columns. Now we move to the prelims section, and let's look at these articles one by one. On page number 12, there's an article related to the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, which is the primary law against terrorism in India. It's also called the Anti-Terror Law of India. If you guys remember, in a recent class, I had actually covered UAPA, the history, the background of the law, and some of the key provisions of UAPA. This law passed in 1967. It was meant to deal with unlawful activities which threaten the sovereignty and the security of the nation. But after 2004, the law has been amended several times, and it has been turned into the primary law against terrorism. So this is the primary legal weapon we have to fight against terrorism. By 2004, India was left with no laws against terrorism because the previous laws like TADA and POTA, they had become highly controversial. TADA lapsed in 1995 because it was being misused by the police and security agencies, leading to human rights violations. POTA also became equally controversial, and it was repealed in 2004 because both the laws gave tremendous powers to the police and security agencies, which apparently was getting misused. The conviction rates were very, very low under TADA and POTA, and there were very serious allegations of human rights violations. So these laws against terrorism were removed from India's law books. So India desperately needed a law against terrorism, and instead of bringing a new law, the government chose to rework an old law and turn it into a law against terrorism. So this 1967 law, UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, it was never meant to deal with terrorism when it was brought out in 1967. It was dealing with so-called unlawful activities which threaten the sovereignty integrity of the nation. It never defined modern day terrorism. But later it was amended several times. The amendments have been done to provide provisions related to terrorism that India faces, including state-sponsored terrorism. So this law defines what's a terror group, defines membership of terror organizations, prescribes the punishment, deals with terror financing as well, and those who give external support, logistical support to terror groups, even they are covered under this law. It's under the UAPA that terror groups can be proscribed by the Ministry of Home Affairs. The MHA, which deals with internal security, can designate a terror group as a terrorist organization. Any organization which is engaged in terrorism can be designated as a terrorist outfit. It can be proscribed by the Ministry of Home Affairs. This is where the legal power comes from for the MHA. Recently, the law was amended in 2019, which allows individuals as well to be designated as terrorists by the Ministry of Home Affairs. Previously, only groups could be listed as terror organizations. Groups like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Al-Qaeda, or the Khalistan outfits, or Northeast outfits, or the Maoist groups. These groups were being proscribed as terrorist organizations. After this amendment in 2019, even individual terrorists can be designated by the MHA. The leaders of these outfits who are responsible for attacks against India, they could be designated as well. Now, under this law, there is one important provision which allows the authorities to confiscate the property belonging to individuals involved in terror acts, and this property can be seized and attached to the ongoing case. This is covered under Section 33 of UAPA. That is what is being reported in this news article. This provision has been invoked by the National Investigation Agency, the NIA, which is the premier anti-terror agency of India. It's the law enforcement agency against terrorism. So NIA has brought these charges and confiscated the property of the sons of Syed Salahuddin, who's the chief, the founder of Hizbul Mujahideen. Hizbul Mujahideen is a major terrorist organization based out of Jammu and Kashmir and Pakistan, fighting this terror war against India. It's reportedly backed by Pakistan's ISI. It has direct backing in Pakistan with regard to funds, training, infrastructure. So the sons of Syed Salahuddin, the founder of Hizbul, right, their property in Srinagar has been confiscated by NIA under the provisions of Section 33, and it's been attached to an ongoing case. So you need to be familiar with these key provisions of the UAPA. Next, on page 12, we have an article related to the nuclear reactors that India is looking to set up with the support of friendly foreign countries. As you know, India has entered into civil nuclear agreements with several countries, starting with the landmark nuclear agreement with the US back in 2004. From here onwards, several countries have signed civil nuclear deals with India, including France. So these countries are very interested to set up their nuclear plants in India. India also has allocated a higher share for nuclear energy in the energy basket. So we are hoping to procure nuclear reactors and nuclear material from countries like US, France, maybe Australia and Japan and others. We already have an ongoing engagement with Russia. Russia is already building a nuclear plant in India, which is the Kundankulam nuclear power plant in Tamil Nadu. So in this regard, it's important for you to know where the nuclear plants of India are located, where exactly these foreign countries are looking to set up nuclear plants in India. The sites, the project sites are very important for your prelims. According to the article, the French nuclear project in India at Jaitapur in Maharashtra, it has been seeing a lot of delays because of nuclear liability issues. See, India and France signed a nuclear agreement several years ago. In 2008 itself, a French nuclear company signed a deal with India's Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. According to the agreement, this French company is supposed to set up the nuclear power plant at Jaitapur in Maharashtra. This project is very, very critical for India. It is a project with a capacity of 9,900 megawatts, which will make it the world's biggest nuclear project. Please note down this point. The Jaitapur nuclear plant, supposed to be built with French assistance, is supposed to become the world's biggest nuclear plant. But the project has been stuck due to issues related to nuclear liability. Similarly, US was also supposed to build nuclear plants in India. American companies like General Electric and Westinghouse, they were supposed to execute nuclear projects in India. But it's been held up from more than 15-16 years because of nuclear liability issues. India has passed a nuclear liability law which provides for liability, that is essentially compensation, during a nuclear disaster. Now see, if a nuclear disaster were to happen, and if innocent civilians are affected by it, if hundreds and thousands are killed, and if lakhs of people are left behind with the damage caused by the nuclear incident, then who will pay the compensation for the victims? That is the big question. Should it be the government? Should it be the company that built the nuclear reactor? Should it be the operator of the nuclear plant? Right? So that is the question here. It should be fair to everyone. So under the International Atomic Energy Agency, there is a nuclear liability framework which is followed around the world. There is a convention on supplementary safeguards of the IAEA, according to which nuclear liability for the manufacturer is kept limited. The ones who built the plant, the ones who manufactured the reactor, they will have some limited liability. They are not exposed to unlimited liability. Meaning the manufacturer cannot be held responsible for all the damages. The plant operator, the concerned government, should also be held liable. This is the internationally accepted principle. So every country which is involved in nuclear trade, they bring out these nuclear liability laws where they clearly prescribe the responsibility of the manufacturer. They keep a cap on what liability the manufacturer should provide in case of an accident. And rest of the burden for compensation should be borne by the operator of the plant and the respective government. But India enacted a nuclear liability law which is against these international standards. Because of our history with industrial accidents, especially the Bhopal gas tragedy, the Indian Parliament was against such limited liability for manufacturers. Because this could encourage negligence. Even if the manufacturer has shown negligence, they may not be held completely liable because of such laws. So the law that India eventually enacted goes against the international provisions. So these countries are not okay with our nuclear liability law. Because the manufacturer can be sued. The victims can file cases for more compensation from the manufacturer beyond the prescribed limit, thus exposing the foreign manufacturers to almost unlimited liability. So that is why foreign nuclear companies are hesitant to come to India and invest in India. That's why these projects have been delayed for a long time. So the article is talking about the delay which has happened, and using this as an opportunity, I would like to show you where the nuclear projects of India are located. Currently, the ones which are operating, they are located at Narora in Uttar Pradesh, the Rajasthan Atomic Power Plant or RAPS. Pokhran is the nuclear test site for India's nuclear weapons. The Kakrapar Atomic Power Plant in Gujarat. Tarapur Nuclear Reactor in Maharashtra. Kaiga Atomic Plant in Karnataka. Kalpakam Reactor in Tamil Nadu. These are some of the operational nuclear reactors of India, right? Largely which they've been developed indigenously through the Department of Atomic Energy, Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, and institutions like BARC, the Baba Atomic Research Center. Alright, so these are the operational nuclear plants of India. Now the government has approved many more projects, including few by foreign companies. We have signed agreements with Russia, France and US. Russia is already building the Kudankulam nuclear plant at Tamil Nadu. Alright, then France has won the contract to build a nuclear plant at Jaitapur in Maharashtra, which we just spoke about. This is set to become the world's largest nuclear plant. US companies have been allocated sites at Kovada in Andhra Pradesh and at Chayamiti Vriddhi in Gujarat. This is where American nuclear reactors will come up. And Russia is supposed to build another nuclear plant at Haripur in West Bengal. Alright. Other than that, few indigenous reactors are coming up at these locations. Gorakhpur, Chutka, at Mahi Banswara in Rajasthan, few new reactors at Kaiga in Karnataka, Bhimpur in Madhya Pradesh, and few more reactors at Tamil Nadu in Kalpakam. Alright, so from a prelims point of view, please be familiar with the location of these nuclear facilities of India. Now coming to the next article, it refers to India-China boundary talks. Yesterday, senior military commanders from India-China have met and they have held the 18th round of border talks. This is a part of the ongoing negotiations that started in 2020 since the Ladakh border crisis broke out in 2020. So India-China have a long-standing border dispute. I'm sure all of you are familiar with it. Since 1950s, China has disputed the Himalayan boundary. It has refused to recognize the British era boundaries. So the different perceptions India and China have has led to a standing dispute. China has even been very aggressive about it, and it even occupied Aksai Chin from India during the 1962 war. This was in the western sector towards the Ladakh region. So towards the western sector from Ladakh to Himachal Pradesh to Uttarakhand, throughout this stretch of the border, we have a standing border dispute. We have a dispute from Sikkim to Arunachal Pradesh as well in the eastern sector. At Nathula Pass, for example, near the Chumbi Valley of Tibet in Sikkim, China is very aggressive about its claims. It keeps pushing India with regard to the border position. In Arunachal especially, China claims whole Arunachal to itself. It calls Arunachal as South Tibet, whereas Arunachal is clearly an integral part of the Indian Union. China refuses to recognize the McMahon line in the eastern sector. So this has been an ongoing standing dispute. Every now and then incursions keep happening. There would be small military escalations leading to tensions, etc. But in 2020, China did something that was quite incredible. India was taken by shock and surprise when China stepped up tensions all of a sudden and started carrying out multiple incursions in the western sector towards the line of actual control. Line of actual control is a temporary de facto border that we have in the western sector where the boundary is not settled. Right? So here, Chinese PLA made incursions at multiple locations, including the strategic and popular Penang So Lake, at Gogra Hot Springs area, and at the Galwan River Valley. Eventually, India also had to counter the mobilization. India brought troops, deployed the Air Force as well to counter the Chinese mobilization, and it led to a tense military standoff. At Galwan River Valley, clashes took place as well between Indian and Chinese troops, where several Indian and Chinese soldiers were killed. Right? More than 20 Indian soldiers were martyred. This represented the biggest increase in tensions between the two countries since 1962. This was an instance where China had breached the previous border agreements. In 1990s, we had signed few border agreements to prevent these issues from happening. In 1993, we had signed a border agreement on maintaining peace and tranquility along the line of actual control. In 1996, we had signed an agreement on maintaining confidence-building measures along the disputed border. According to these border agreements of 1993 and 1996, India and China, they are supposed to follow the established protocols in case of incursions and military standoffs to quickly disengage and de-escalate so that it does not turn into a much bigger conflict. Since the border is unresolved, these tensions are likely to occur again and again. So that is why these boundary agreements were put in place to create an established procedure, established protocol, under which both sides would talk to each other, negotiate with each other at the level of military commanders itself, without involving the entire governments, so that local commanders and senior military commanders can talk to each other and resolve the issue locally, so that they can disengage and de-escalate without allowing small incursions and small standoffs to escalate into a bigger conflict. For many years, India-China had followed the commitment, but of late, China has been breaching this deliberately. Since last few years, as India has gotten closer to Western countries and the US, China has put more pressure on India and it has repeatedly broken these previous agreements. That is what we saw in 2020 on a much larger scale. Following these tensions, it appeared as if India-China were preparing for a much bigger conflict. But fortunately, calmer minds have prevailed. Both sides have been holding several rounds of talks between their military commanders, and at few locations the conflict has been de-escalated. At places like Penang So, Hot Springs, Galwan Valley and Gogra, both sides have agreed on a disengagement process and they have pulled back their troops and they have de-escalated the situation. But the standoff is still continuing even after 3 years at Depsang Plains over here and at a place called Demchok, which is roughly located over here. At these two places, the standoff continues. That is why India and China are holding the 18th boundary talks to find a solution for this issue. Both the sides have met at the Chushul-Moldo border meeting point. in Chushul, which is located between Panongso and the Spangnur Gap. You can also see other important locations here like Rezangla. At all these places, clashes occurred in 2020. So here, between Panongso and Spangnur Gap, you have the Chushul sector, and you have Moldo on the other side, which is controlled by China under Aksai Chin territory, which is essentially Indian territory that China has occupied. So here there is a border meeting point for the Indian Army and the Chinese PLA. So here at the Chushul-Moldo border meeting point, 18th round of military boundary talks have taken place, and they have agreed on some measures to de-escalate from Depsang Plains and Demchok as well. They haven't reached a final agreement. They've just agreed that we should de-escalate. We should resolve this issue. This is seen as a big development because it's been 3 years since India and China have been locked in this tense military standoff. Right now, India is hosting the SCO summit. So China's leaders will be visiting India after many, many years. Chinese defense minister will come to India very soon to take part in the defense ministers meeting of SCO. Eventually, Chinese Premier Xi Jinping will also come to India to attend the SCO summit, which India will be hosting at Goa. So given the importance of the SCO summit, it's unlikely that India-China can maintain that tense, hostile position. So maybe because of the upcoming SCO summit, both sides are fast-tracking the negotiation process to de-escalate from Depsang Plains and Demchok. Alright, so this topic is relevant for your mains as well, but the locations I have highlighted, right? And the other locations you see here in the map, like Daulat Beg Oldi, Darbuk, Shok, all these locations are very important for your prelims, for a map-based question. Next, on page 13, the article says the government is looking to merge Vibrant Villages program with PM Gati Shakti. Recently, I had explained what is Vibrant Villages program. I had covered it in detail. This was announced in this year's union budget. Under this, the government is planning to create essential infrastructure, especially connectivity projects along the northern borders of India that faces China, to bring development to border villages towards the Chinese border. In these 4 border states and 1 union territory, that is in Ladakh, Himachal Pradesh, then Uttarakhand, Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh. In these 4 states and 1 union territory that shares a boundary with China, the border villages will be developed and given modern connectivity infrastructure under this dedicated special program. This is VVP, Vibrant Villages Program. The idea is to provide inclusive growth, improve the quality of life, provide economic opportunities so that migration of people from the border villages can be curbed. If the people in border areas don't have economic opportunities, they will move out of the area. The area becomes depopulated, thus making it easier for hostile countries like China to enhance their claims. But if you have a big habitation, if you have border villages, it will be all the more difficult for China to carry out incursions and occupy these territories. It will further cement India's position. And also bringing such development is essential to ensure that the locals are always in favor of India. They should act as the eyes and ears of the government and the security agencies. They should never help or work with the foreign countries and hostile elements. So for that reason, you need such special border development programs, and Vibrant Villages program was recently launched with a budget of 4,800 crores, and more than 2,000 villages have been chosen. 2,967 villages have been chosen in 19 districts along the Chinese border. So this ambitious infrastructure connectivity program is being merged with PM Gati Shakti. PM Gati Shakti is also called the National Master Plan for Connectivity. It's a very ambitious flagship program of the Modi government that merges all the connectivity programs, be it Bharatmala, Sagarmala initiative, Udan, and other schemes of the railways and the industrial clusters and economic zones that India is building. All these mega infrastructure projects are being subsumed and integrated under PM Gati Shakti to create multimodal infrastructure in the country, to improve our roads, that is highways, railway network, improve the port infrastructure, power grids, mobile and internet connection, right? All such connectivity and infrastructure, transport infrastructure is being enhanced under this ambitious scheme, that is PM Gati Shakti scheme. So Vibrant Villages program which is also related to connectivity and infrastructure, is being merged with PM Gati Shakti. That is what you need to understand. Next article from the healthcare sector. Malaria is all set to be declared as a notifiable disease all across the country. As you know, malaria is a deadly tropical disease. It's caused by a protozoan. It's caused by a parasitic pathogen, a protozoan. It belongs to the protozoan family called Plasmodium. Plasmodium is a parasitic protozoan. You have Plasmodium vivax, the most common pathogen that causes malaria in several tropical, subtropical countries, including India. In Africa, you have another variant called Plasmodium falciparum. These are the two variants of Plasmodium which is responsible for malaria, which is a deadly tropical disease. It is a vector-borne disease. The vector here is mosquitoes. Right? Mosquitoes deliver the protozoan through their bites. So tropical and subtropical countries, they are more prone, more vulnerable, where mosquitoes are widely prevalent and even the Plasmodium protozoan is widely prevalent. It induces very severe fever, joint pain, nausea, vomiting, night chills, and it could eventually turn fatal as well, as it could lead to a drop in your platelet count. So it's a leading killer in many countries, especially in Africa and Asia. So there is a global campaign against malaria. All right, India especially is fighting hard against malaria as well. Under UN Sustainable Development Goal number 3, the third target deals with elimination of malaria along with other deadly tropical infectious diseases such as tuberculosis and others. Under the same target, under SDG 3.3, malaria is also set for elimination. India also has drawn out a roadmap to eliminate malaria from the country by 2030. We actually have a vision to make India malaria free by 2027, 3 years before the UN target, and completely eliminate the disease by 2030 according to the UN Sustainable Development Goal. See, malaria can be treated. There is treatment available, as in the symptoms can be treated. Vaccines are available, but they're not very effective. But the best way is to prevent malaria. That is, you prevent the breeding grounds for mosquitoes. That is the best solution, along with quick diagnosis, effective treatment for the symptoms, and quick recovery. So this is what India is focusing on, along with help from WHO and other organizations. Now, since malaria is widely prevalent in most of the states, almost every state and union territory in the country have declared malaria as a notifiable disease. This is a state mandate. Except for Bihar, Andaman Nicobar Islands and Meghalaya, every other state and UT has declared malaria as a notifiable disease. But now, due to rise in cases in Bihar, Andaman Nicobar Islands and Meghalaya, these regions also, these states and union territories as well, are declaring malaria as a notifiable disease, thus making it a notifiable disease across India, in every state, in every union territory of India. Is that clear? But actually, malaria cases have been on the decline. India has done quite well. We have brought down the caseload in the last few years through better control and prevention methods. But since the risk has gone up in Bihar, Andaman Nicobar and Meghalaya, these administrations are also declaring it as a notifiable disease, and thus malaria will become a notifiable disease across India, in every state and in every union territory. Notifiable diseases are given more priority. There will be a dedicated task force, dedicated focus on such notifiable diseases. All right, so that is what you need to understand here. Now, coming to the last article for today, according to this article from page 15, Bangladesh has come out with a doctrine for the Indo-Pacific region. Now, this is a big development. Bangladesh is a very close neighbor of India, a close friend of India. It's a key member of the Bay of Bengal region, which is integral to the Indian Ocean, right? So today, Indo-Pacific region is the most important region in global geopolitics. This is where a Cold War has broken out between China and US, and China has been threatening the rules-based order. It has been disrupting the rules-based international order by violating international laws such as the UN clause, UN Convention on Law of the Sea. China has been very aggressive in triggering disputes in South China Sea. It has threatened the sovereignty of and integrity of several countries in Southeast Asia. It's gotten into a confrontation with US, Australia and Japan as well. And China has even disrupted freedom of navigation for ships and freedom of overflight for aircrafts in the Indo-Pacific. Chinese Navy and Air Force, they frequently intercept foreign vessels and foreign aircraft from passing through the disputed areas in South China Sea. So this is a violation of international law. It's a breakdown of rules-based order. So that is why all the major powers like India, US, Japan and Australia, they have come together to form groupings like Quadrilateral to enforce the rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. They all have an Indo-Pacific vision. India has an Indo-Pacific doctrine. Japan has a vision called Free and Open Indo-Pacific. So US, Australia, all these countries, they have dedicated doctrines towards Indo-Pacific region. Even European powers like UK, Germany, Italy, France and Russia, even they have their Indo-Pacific strategies. Similarly, Bangladesh has spelled out its Indo-Pacific objectives right before Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister, visits Japan, US and Australia. This is very significant because even Bangladesh has expressed concern about the increasing threat to rules-based order in the Indo-Pacific. Bangladesh has said it will focus on peacekeeping, promoting peace, tackling terrorism, and upholding the rules-based order in the region. This probably allows Bangladesh to incline with India, align with India's Indo-Pacific doctrine as well. In fact, India-Bangladesh already have a very close strategic and security relationship. We even have joint military exercises. We are part of groupings like BIMSTEC. So India-Bangladesh already work very closely in the Bay of Bengal region. So Bangladesh taking this position through its Indo-Pacific doctrine is also a significant development. It shows the growing closeness between India, Bangladesh and the common vision that we hold towards the Indo-Pacific. So that is the last update I would like to give here. And with this, I bring my discussion to an end. There are a couple of mains practice questions. Please take it up, write an answer and post them in the answer writing portal, for which link is given in the description below. Don't forget, as soon as the session ends, there's a quiz on our Telegram channel. So please subscribe to the Telegram channel so you can take up these practice questions for your prelims to revise these topics. So that is it from my side. I hope it was a good, fruitful session. I know sessions get extended by a few minutes, but trust me, it's worth it. I hope you have the same opinion, you feel the same. Do let me know in the comments if these sessions are good, if it's helping you. If you are liking it, support us by pressing the like button and do subscribe to the channel. So that is it from my side. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.